It's no use to sugarcoat things. The industry is facing an existential crisis, the biggest in its history. On the flip side, being slow to reopen is hopefully not as open-ended as it's felt so far.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Russ Fisher, the editorial director of the Box Office Studios, which provides editorial content to movie theaters. And I am joined again by Daniel Laria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro magazine, and Rebecca Pauley, the deputy editor of Box Office Pro magazine. Welcome. It's good to talk to you guys again.
Yeah, we have different combinations here in the podcast. This is one of the very homey ones. I feel very comfortable at this point with the three of us.
That's nice.
Let's just crack out the wine, you know?
Honestly, it's almost 5:00 where you guys are. It's close enough. Why not? Yeah, this is good. There's been I think all of us, there's been some vacation and some travel and family stuff, I think, for everybody here. So we've had different configurations on the podcast over the last couple of weeks, and it's nice to be back with the three of us. And movie theaters are opening again, which, we started this podcast in March just as coronavirus really took effect in the United States. And now we're at this point where the thing that we have been talking about for literally the entire life cycle of this podcast so far, like our very extended first season, if you want to call it that, has been, when will cinemas reopen and what will it be like when they do? This is like almost our season finale, if you want to look at it this way, because we're on the cusp of this. We're going to end with a cliffhanger, maybe like, hey, things are open. What's going to happen next?
And this is sweeps week. Yeah. This is sweeps week, and the back half of the season will be the real meat when we figure out how it goes.
I think going back to our original production notes as we were plotting out these episodes, like the reopening episode must have been like episode 6. We got this.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. And as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, we're not the only country that thought, oh, we got this, and then had a second wave and had to close things down.
That's 2020.
We'll get to that in a minute. That's 2020. That's the way this year, this insane, I can't wait for it to be over year goes. But first, okay, let's talk about reopening, because we have domestic cinema chains reopening. Well, the top 5 circuits will soon be able to be giving up data from those reopenings, so we'll be able to see how box office went, how many people showed up. So, Rebecca, where do things stand right now? What's the landscape look like?
Finally, things are opening. Actually, as of right now, Cineplex, the largest exhibitor in Canada, already has 80% of their theaters open, and they have already started releasing some films, which Daniel's going to speak to later. We're recording this podcast on Wednesday, August 19th, so by the time you're listening to it, we will have 100 AMC theaters open up across the United States with special Centennial pricing at 15 cents, because this is their 100th year. It is also Box Office's 100th year. I'm contractually obligated to say it's our Centennial. Happy birthday, us. Woo. We're also seeing big reopenings in, Cinemark. Cinemark is continuing to open up. Marcus is opening up a third of their theaters 2 days from now, so in the past for listeners, and then another third on August 28th. Showcase Cinema has announced some reopenings, and Alamo Drafthouse has also announced that they're going to be opening 8 of their locations, again, this weekend, 2 days from now. So if you're listening to this, you might be able to go pop into an Alamo and go see a movie and eat some queso, depending on where you are. Now, on the less positive side of things here, as we've spoken about on this podcast before, this is quarterly earnings call week, where we listen to the earnings calls of a variety of exhibitors just to kind of find out what's going on with them. And one of those that we've been paying attention to is Reading International. Now, Reading owns and operates theaters in the United States. None of those are opened yet, though they're planning to open a couple theaters in Hawaii soon. And then they are also a top 5 exhibitor in New Zealand and Australia. Now, New Zealand was one of those countries that it seemed like they really had it on lockdown. And honestly, they did. They did a really good job. New Zealand, they were able to open their cinemas certainly, earlier than we were here in the United States. And Reading was able to have 9 of their 10 locations in New Zealand open. That 10th was only because of seismic activity. It had nothing to do with COVID. I think there were concerns that there might be an earthquake. But recently...
As if COVID wasn't enough.
Right. I'm sorry, New Zealand. Man, you're really
coming soon to New Zealand cinemas near you.
And coming just recently to the capital city of Auckland, a COVID spike. So another Reading cinema has had to shut down. In Australia, where Reading also operates, there's been a spike in Victoria. So they have to keep 7 locations closed through mid-September. Like New Zealand even got to the point where they were not legally mandated to do social distancing in their auditorium. Like they could sell 100%. And now, there's another spike. They had to close a theater, and they're back to limited capacity. So, even in a country like New Zealand, which had, headlines very early on about how good they were being in handling this, even in that case, there's a backslide. It's not the whole country. At this point, it looks like it's confined to a neighborhood. But, even with them, it's a marathon, not a race situation. And it's going to be like that as we go on.
And it's wild because the New Zealand outbreak, it's like 30 people, right? It's 30 cases. But of course, as we know from the transmissibility and the infection rate of this, that those 30 cases can very easily spiral up into, a hotspot of significantly more. So they have to take those precautions. But is that, I wonder, a preview of what's to come in other places?
I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's a doom and gloom situation. From what I understand, it's very responsible, and they took action, before things got worse. Over here in the United States, as I mentioned, all of Reading cinemas are still closed. There was a little interesting tidbit that they, like many other cinema chains across the United States, have kind of dipped their toes into the virtual theatrical model. And CEO Ellen Cotter admitted, didn't make a ton of money on it, which follows what we've been hearing from other exhibitors, that it's more about sort of the intangibles of keeping in touch with your customers than getting a ton of money through the virtual theatrical model. But them trying out virtual theatrical did kind of give them the boost, the knowledge that they're now using to launch their own streaming platform, to be called Angelica Anywhere. There's no date yet on when they're going to kickstart it. They say it's going to be this year. But with that, Reading will be the 3rd exhibitor in the United States since COVID has caused a theatrical shutdown to launch their own streaming VOD platforms. That's them, Alamo and Showcase, and AMC. Cineplex in Canada and Cinepolis in Mexico already have their own platforms. So it's another part of the Windows conversation, is that it is looking like more and more exhibitors in the United States are going to be adding VOD to their repertoire.
And it's interesting on that note that we're seeing exhibitors that aren't large enough to make that investment on their own sort of partner up with other companies and other entities to create these sort of groups that come together to bring in this sort of VOD technology and facilitate virtual theatrical models during this period. That's the case for a group of art house exhibitors here in the United States that just came together this week to announce a national cohort of theaters that would show films with this technology. These cinemas that have banded together are all independent art house locations across the country. They include the Amherst Cinema in Massachusetts, the Austin Film Society in Texas, the Avalon in Washington, D.C., the Chelsea Theater in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, the famous Coolidge Corner Cinema in Brookline, Massachusetts, a personal favorite here for Rebecca and I, the Film Forum in New York City, Filmstream in Omaha, Nebraska, the Grail Movie House in Asheville, North Carolina, the Loft Cinema in Tucson, Arizona, Roxy Theater in San Francisco, California, and the founders of the project, the Salt Lake Film Society in Utah.
That's what I've been hearing from some exhibitors, and Daniel, I'm curious if this is what you've been hearing as well, that once people embark on this virtual theatrical model, it's not as difficult tech-wise, perhaps, as they thought it would be. you think building up a VOD platform is a huge nightmarish thing, but it became an issue of, no, actually, we can do this, and maybe it gives us opportunities to explore things. Granted, I mean, I think what it's going to come down to after this is an issue of terms and agreements between exhibitors and distributors as to who gets what money-wise, and is that going to change, and who's it going to change for the benefit of?
And that, Rebecca, sounds like yet another part of a bigger issue that we need to tackle in kind of larger context down the road, because it connects to the windowing conversation. It connects to the overall shift that we're seeing in the business this year. It connects to things we've talked about with respect to smaller cinemas responding to AMC and Universal's deal, and quite a few other topics here. So we're going to come back to that in some point in the not too distant future, because I think that demands a more full amount of time from us. And in the meantime, though, let's talk about New York and New Jersey. Where are they in the national opening schedule at this point?
Well, the biggest story there is that they're not. We're 5 months into this crisis, and cinemas in New York and New Jersey still don't have a time frame to return to operation. It's been a tense time for exhibitors in the area. We all know of the lawsuit that the National Association of Theater Owners in New Jersey went forward with in the state. For the moment, it seems that that is not going to move forward in having any immediate change. Whereas in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo has moved forward with providing an open lane for gyms to open indoor operations and even bowling alleys to return to business, but no such luck for cinemas. It's a piece of news that's been very difficult for exhibitors in this region to hear. Guys, I think we all understand when it comes to these things that public health is paramount for everyone. It's one thing if there are orders to close all businesses until further notice, but I think what is making a lot of the exhibition community nervous is that we are in a stage, at least in New York, where things are opening, but there are no objective determinations into what sort of business can open when. It seems to be going down to the whims of the governor and his staff, which causes some inconsistencies, such as the policy right now to have indoor dining, to have things like bowling alleys and like indoor gyms get sort of what is being seen as preferential treatment over exhibitors who, as opposed to gyms and as opposed to bowling alleys, can more easily control crowd disbursement and admissions within their doors.
Daniel, I do have to say that I did note and appreciate your phrasing on an open lane to open bowling. And I want you to think that didn't go appreciated.
No, we heard that. Yeah.
No, but it is. I mean, if you look at the gym situation, Cuomo gave one date for when gyms could open, and then New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said, actually, no, for us it won't be before September 2nd. So you're still seeing that disparity between different levels of government, a lot of confusion in terms of, well, the state says one thing, the city says another thing. The city has more COVID cases than the state does. So how do you mesh that out? And it's just there's really a lack of clarity on what needs to happen in order for movie theaters to open.
Does it seem likely that over the next couple of weeks, as other regions in the United States get theaters up and running, that after a week or possibly 2 weeks, and seeing how infections go, and hopefully seeing that there are not widespread infections as a result of theater attendance, fingers crossed that that'll be the way it goes. Do you think that that'll have any effect on New York and New Jersey policy?
To be completely honest, I'm not sure, because normally I would say that those two metrics are important to keep an eye on as we sort of track the reopening effort. What is happening in New York, however, isn't really tied into that reality, where you have a number of indoor businesses that, using the governor's own words, he and his team deem to be more essential than others during this period. When it comes to an objective analysis, to say, well, the infection rates in this area are not conducive to any sort of indoor activity or reopening in general, I think that's one thing. It's a different thing altogether when a team unilaterally decides what and what isn't in a time frame to reopen, regardless of the infection rates in a specific district or state.
Well, and then you have the flip side of that too. I mean, you ask if theaters opening goes well in one area, does that bode well for areas maybe like New York or like California where a date has not been set? I mean, look at the flip side of that. Schools are reopening. What are we going to see in terms of numbers elsewhere in the country, and how is that going to affect theaters there? I mean, I think that's could potentially, have a big impact on businesses being allowed to open, maybe businesses having to close back up again. I mean, the schools thing is that could go bad.
And it has gone bad in a few places already, in Georgia and, some other states.
I think it's also important to find silver linings in even the news that we find the most difficult during this point. It's no use to sugarcoat things. The industry is facing an existential crisis, the biggest in its history. On the flip side, being slow to reopen is hopefully not as open-ended as it's felt so far. So gyms didn't have a time frame to reopen in New York State. When the governor provided them a reopening date, it was with a 10 days heads up. So really, it was a week and a half to give them the green light to return to operations. So even when we do have this move forward ability, we're seeing that it's not this longer sort of period for that to occur. Another factor, as you had brought up, Rebecca, I think the bigger threat we have to start considering is the potential, and no one wants to see this happen, but the potential of a second shutdown of cinemas in any given region. Now, most regions can somewhat stomach that, but the number one film market in the United States is going to feel that much more acutely if it does open and then is forced to close in the interim.
I mean, that'll have a huge impact on the studio scheduling of films down the line. I mean, that's going to have a huge ripple effect if they open prematurely. In other areas, Canada, their number one exhibitor, Cineplex, is open 80%, and in that and other nations that have had more open theaters up to this point, Daniel, we're actually seeing some fairly encouraging box office reports.
Nothing close to pre-pandemic levels, but we are seeing slow and steady progress in terms of location counts. And I think that's going to be one of the main indicators to keep an eye out for when we can't really trust the success of a film based on opening weekends. It's going to be how many screens is it playing on. In Canada, last weekend, that is the week of August 14th to the 16th from the date of recording, we had 3 titles open in around 300 locations across Canada. Domestic title from Quebec, along with 2 major studio productions. One of them being the Russell Crowe vehicle Unhinged from Solstice Studios, and the other being Paramount's SpongeBob. I don't know which a sponge. Is it a sponge out of water? Is it a sponge on the run?
Yes.
Which sponge is this?
Run.
This sponge is running.
Sponge on the run, actually.
Sponge on the run.
Let's do that
one again. In the world of movie titles that sort of get lost in the crowd there. Now, that title is definitely going to be lost in the rush here in the US because it hit PVOD instead of a theatrical release. So it's only going to be hitting, as far as we know, in a significant level, theaters internationally and in Canada. Little by little, we're seeing those grosses come in. SpongeBob did, I wouldn't say great, but the numbers there weren't critical. You had around $900,000 from those 300 locations. So to give you a sort of comparison, that comes in around the 3rd or 4th weekend of the previous SpongeBob movie in terms of per screen average and performance. So it's not anywhere near the expectations we had for the title, but it's chugging along. Elsewhere internationally, we have a couple of anomalies, seeing that some markets are open but are waiting for new Hollywood titles. That is the case in China, where a movie from 2001 opened with $13.6 million. I'm not even going to guess the title of this Harry Potter entry. Rebecca, I think you're our resident Harry Potter expert. Which one of the Harry Potters is this one? What's the subtitle here?
I believe that was Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone in the UK market.
Oh, you get your choice. It's one or the other.
That's the first one. That was the very first.
So I actually have a horrible confession here. I've never seen a single one of those Harry Potter movies.
There's only one of them that's good.
Is it the Mexican one?
So,
Is it the one the Mexican dude? That's good. Wonderful.
Yep.
Representing us.
And also the Deathly Hallows Part 1 is pretty good because it's like kind of a road movie. There's a part where they dance to a Nick Cave song in the middle of that movie. Like, what's that about?
Oh, God. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So now my question is, I've seen reporting on that Harry Potter Chinese release in the trades. They refer to it as a re-release. Do you guys know if this is actually the first time that a lot of Chinese audiences have had an opportunity to see that movie theatrically? Or is this a movie that's been, done circuit in China in the past?
So, as you know, the Chinese market has grown considerably since the release of this film in 2001, rising quickly to becoming a quickly growing market, the number 2 in the world. From the box office data that we have spanning this whole time, we don't have box office data from China on any sort of wide release on this title. If it had played, it wasn't done so at a scale commercially that would be significant. So it seems like this is the first opportunity that a wide audience in China has had to see this movie, the first chapter in a beloved franchise, on the big screen. And related to that situation, we have another market like Saudi Arabia that just recently welcomed cinemas back for decades. Not too long ago, I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago, when cinemas were once again welcome into Saudi Arabia. We had another re-release from Warner Brothers, Inception, open up in that market. Just in 15 screens, guys, that movie ended up making $186,000. So from a very limited basis, this is another title that has been in the archives for a major studio, hadn't played in a market, and because of the situation, it's created an opportunity where audiences can see this type of movie on the big screen for the first time.
Oh, man, I'm jealous. I want to see some of my favorite movies on the big screen for the first time again. Minus the global pandemic situation, obviously.
Just in general, just overall.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that would be nice.
Capping off the sort of box office data that we got from last weekend, as we were saying, it's been some interesting sort of highlights market by market, but there are 2 very positive stories that emerged last weekend at the international box office. We have the example of STX's Greenland, a new release that was set for one of those early return to cinema slots here in the United States that got pushed back a little bit, but was put into the release internationally since theaters there were already open. That title, according to STX, is performing well above its pre-pandemic expectations in France. The film there has now grossed a total of $4.55 million in the French market. And that is significant because if you look at other titles like Greenland, such as Geostorm, Angel Has Fallen, London Has Fallen, or Olympus Has Fallen, or what we can call the Gerard Butler greatest hits. This title, Greenland, is performing well above the theatrical run pre-pandemic of those titles in France. It's an example of a film that probably wouldn't have had as much success with a full schedule of titles out there. But for example, guys, right now, Greenland is 31% ahead of where Olympus Has Fallen was in the French box office at the same time.
So was France just carrying a lot of bitterness and disdain for Gerard Butler for his turn as the Phantom of the Opera, and they're just now getting over it?
You know what? I think our colleagues at Cahiers du Cinéma have had a rough go lately, but this might be one of those like post-World War II, all of these movies come back into the market situation where Gerard Butler might be our new Alfred Hitchcock. I'm just waiting for that new like Truffaut Hitchcock equivalent with Gerard Butler.
He deserves that. Good for him.
It's, it's weird because his Phantom of the Opera is a movie that for some reason has come up in like 6 different conversations I've had over the past week.
People keep
I don't know why. Well, I guess it's in part it's the death of Joel Schumacher, who made the movie, and I don't know. There's some other things. There was a video of Patrick Wilson rehearsing for that movie that went around in like one social media circle that I follow, and it's a great video because he just nails it, and he nails it with like seemingly not even trying. It's kind of terrific. But yeah, it's just weird that movie out of all the movies that could possibly come up right now is sort of bubbling into the conversation.
I hate to say it, I don't remember that ever coming out. Again, that could show up at like the CinemaCon presentation in 2022, and I'd be like, wow, when's that coming out?
The movie caught some hell at the time, from me included, to be honest, about the fact that like Minnie Driver, they gave her they dubbed her. It wasn't her doing the singing because the character's a freaking opera singer, and I was disdainful of that. And now I'm like, I saw Russell Crowe in Les Miserables. I think they should do more dubbing in musicals.
Yeah. Tom Hooper has reaffirmed a lot of old Hollywood techniques in the musical.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years alone.
Between Les Mis and Cats.
And finally, I think one of the other aspects that we were talking about the international market a couple of weeks back, as we started tracking the European reopening, was the role that domestic titles would have in the market, right? You have markets that are waiting for Hollywood titles to come in. Is this the right time for a domestic title to become a hit? That's actually been the case in Spain, which has had a little bit of a roller coaster ride with COVID cases recently. As we know, it was one of the early European markets to be devastated by the pandemic. It recovered decently well enough to allow Real Madrid to win its first La Liga championship in years, thank God. And now we have a situation where a popular comedy sequel has hit the market. Padre No Hay Más Que Uno Dos has opened in that market and has now grossed a total of $8.4 million. And that is already $800,000 ahead of where its predecessor was at the same point in release. So we're seeing a situation where a domestic title is coming out in a market that has been heavily affected not only by COVID, but by a resurgence of cases in recent weeks, and has still been able to outperform a direct comp during this span. So this doesn't mean that cinema's back. It doesn't mean that we're all where we used to be, but they are very positive indicators from these markets that the business can sustain itself even after being ravaged by the pandemic.
And so that kind of connects to something else that we've talked to over the past weeks and months, is the idea of communicating to audiences that they can go back to the movies now, and trying to entice audiences back to the movies. Now, I know in the US, the UK, and a number of other territories, there are some new audience engagement campaigns that are kicking off between now and the next week or two. Rebecca, can you give us kind of a quick rundown of what we're going to be seeing in different countries?
Indeed. As we've seen, the reopening of theaters has been gradual. The release of films has been gradual, and so too have these audience engagement campaigns. It's really been more of a marathon and not a race. There are early campaigns that we've spoken about on the podcast before, like Movies Together, like the French campaign On ira to au cinéma. I don't speak French, so apologies to my French colleagues on the pronunciation there. And those campaigns were very geared towards encouraging people to remember the movies, to remember the enthusiasm and the love that they feel for the movies. And since then, we have seen other campaigns pop up. Of course, there's the Pioneers Assistance Fund from Will Rogers and Art House America, which are both campaigns geared specifically towards getting money to people who have been adversely affected by the furlough. We have NATO's own engagement campaign, Save Your Cinema. And unlike the previous Return to Cinema campaigns, this one is geared directly towards inviting and encouraging people to reach out to their congresspeople in support of movie theaters. We've spoken to NATO, and as of August 14, there have been 288,000 letters sent by 95,000 plus people. Every single congressional office has gotten letters in support of movie theaters, which I think is really great. Tomorrow, that would be Thursday, August 20th, we are seeing a UK campaign launch called Love Cinema, created by the UKCA and the DDA, trade groups representing exhibitors and distributors in the UK. And as we said, that's something that's launching tomorrow, and we're going to be speaking to that more later on. One of the campaigns that I found really interesting, actually, was one that took place in Japan. Daniel, something that you were saying about local productions really kind of relates to this, because there are in Japan, somewhere between probably like 150, 200. They call them mini theaters. They are independent theaters that aren't really affiliated with any of the major chains or the major studios. And due to a real lack of government support, they were really, they found themselves in a difficult situation financially when they were forced to shut down. Something that I thought was really interesting is that in 2019, about half the films that came out in Japan only screened in those mini theaters. So they're an essential part of the diversity of the ecosystem of theatrical exhibition in Japan. So 2 famous art house directors in Japan joined a group to launch this mini theater aid crowdfunding campaign that ultimately earned over $3 million American dollars to help these independent cinemas in Japan. And actually, I was speaking to one of the co-founders, and he was saying that these mini theaters, it's almost like there's too much local content. There are all these mini theaters where they're the only place to screen these movies, and now there's just a lot of content that are trying to get into these theaters. But the issue is having the money to stay open. So, it is heartening that both in the United States and overseas, we're seeing people, donate money. We're seeing people reach out to their government representatives to hopefully get these theaters money that they desperately need. Because, as we've spoken about before, this isn't going to be an issue of, Tenet comes out and everything's back to normal. This is going to be a slow, gradual process of recovery. And these campaigns are going to continue to be essential in the coming months, for sure.
Guys, it's great to do this with you again. Let's do it again next week.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe, whatever. I'm kidding.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening. The Box Office Podcast is produced by Caitlin Kehoe and recordeditpodcast.com. This episode was written by Daniel Loria and Rebecca Pauley and narrated by Daniel, Rebecca, and me, Russ Fisher. Join us again next week when we will have even more box office and theater reopening data and subjects and anecdotes to share and talk about. See you then. Thanks.